friend who's quite good at poker, and he says, the most important decision when playing poker is which table to sit at. I say I want to play with people who are better than me because I want to get better at it, but also I don't want to bet that much when I'm playing against people who are better than me, right? But like, same thing, like, people more experienced than me, like I want to go hang out with someone who can like, sit me down and tell me some shit. So
I think that's so important, that what you said before is like the ability to pass it on. That's something that makes the Valley work. And I think now that culture's been democratized globally, I think that's so important to continuously pass things on to like a younger generation, especially because we don't have apprenticeships or, structured mentorships. And I imagine internships will become more and more infrequent, right. Given like how the world's changing and evolving. Hopefully that comes back, but it's so important to have these systems of like, hey, I'm going to give back to people who are up and coming. And that requires like a charitableness of soul and things like that.
It's also quite rewarding. I think it doesn't have to be selfless in the sense of, like watching things grow, like, I mean, that was, at network school, we were doing these comedy improv things. And it's just beautiful to watch people open up. Almost everybody has some kind of like stage fright or something like that, and if you just throw people in the river and, eventually they learn how to swim and it's beautiful to watch. Like, I don't want to make money off of comedy. I just want to like enjoy laughing with my friends,
Yeah, yeah. Actually, let's talk about this a little bit. So Chris and I were just in Malaysia, just over the border from Singapore for the past month at Balaji's network school. And basically a bunch of tech entrepreneurs took over this abandoned Chinese ghost city hotel. And there's like, right now, I think there's like about 150 people there from all over the world, mostly tech entrepreneurs. And it's like sort of like a Y Combinator, kind of like a college campus. There's all these different programs happening every day. They're really encouraging people to launch Lumas. So there's anything from like robotics, machine learning, talks on ZK, but then also Chris and I were hosting comedy improv. People are hosting meditations and yoga. And then you're just in this like co-work space. And for me, it felt kind of like back in the day of living in the Bay Area when I was in Mountain View, when you and I first met. It had this vibe of like, entrepreneurship, the spirit of like something new, the frontier markets. And it's a lot of young people there. So super inspiring to like kind of cross-pollinate. And also I felt I got younger hanging out with a bunch of 20-somethings.
I like what you said about the Silicon Valley exporting its culture globally. I mean, that was one of the coolest things. There's a lot of crazy shit in California, that it makes me not want to live there. But the entrepreneurial culture there is unprecedented, and I think a huge part of, of course, the law also supports it. Like, you're not personally liable if your company runs out of money, and and there's also like a bunch of tech millionaires or like new money loves to like invest in new money, but also just this, like, it's cool to fail.
For better or worse, San Francisco, Silicon Valley is the biggest thing that it exports is culture, in all forms, and there's good and bad sides to it. And it exports its, culture around entrepreneurship, but it can also export its culture around societal norms and political governance. And
that's a good point, because I mean the whole LGBT rainbow stuff that came flooding through Twitter,
right,
and then people in Uganda being like, "What is this? What do you mean man can become woman?" I
view it as like the nexus in the center of the world, and it's always a look into the future. I mean, if you go to San Francisco right now, you'll see robotic taxis, flying down the road, autonomously ferrying people from like point A to point B. Right, that's the future right there. If you look at their systems of governance or how people are changing, in terms of like, it's totally normal, 6 months ago to hand out fentanyl, just on the streets. And now people are like, maybe that's not a good idea, right? Maybe we shouldn't do that anymore.
Fail fast,
Fail fast, right?
Big
there's differing views on, should we build housing or not? And where should that housing be? And it really breaks down in terms of like societal beliefs and age range and things like that. So I do think Silicon Valley, San Francisco is a window into the future of the US, but also the world. And there's good and bad things. And I think that the reason why there's such an accelerant on the culture there is because of it's also at the frontier of technology. And the latest technologies are mass distribution, network effect forces, Twitter, Instagram, whatnot. And so those things are an accelerant on human communication, the message spreading. And so that takes that culture and accelerates it throughout society. In the past, it was probably more LA because Hollywood, was the propagator of the propaganda, right? And the message, right? And now that's become less relevant, though with TikTok influencer houses, I'm sure there's like some stranglehold on it.
There's quite a bit of interplay between these two threads, right. But I mean, California somehow, whether it was like the cultural revolution of the 60s or whatever, I think everyone got really neuroplastic back then, and then they started thinking new ideas, and some of those ideas were like really interesting, powerful ideas, and some of them were like batshit crazy. But like, once you start like, deconditioning your mind, your mind is amazing. You could think any thought, no matter like how to. There's nothing in your neurology that says like you have to believe things that are true, So
tell us, go back to network state. I want to hear where you're going with this. I know
we're all over the place. I mean, network state was an amazing space. I plan to go back every time we hire someone. We're asking them like, hey, are you okay with coming to either Bali or to the network school for a 1 month period? That's at awesome. Some point, it's not required to relocate, but would you do a month in either of these places? And every person we've hired said yes, because they're tired of working at home. They want that experience of being in the same room. And I think that things iterate much faster. And that's probably one of the advantages of Silicon Valley is the high concentration of talent in a single area. And people do go to the office to work together every day.
That's such an interesting thing. So people do go into the office. There is this movement of like return to office, and I think that it's a net positive thing. There's really two sides to this whole remote work thing that I think are countervailing forces on each other. It's undeniable that having people together to ideate, to create, to meet deadlines is definitely a thing that works and net positive for people trying to achieve something great and ambitious. On the flip side, it's also true that spending half your life in a commute is just net negative for your soul and just bad for your time. That's right. Real. So there are these like two opposing things. And I think in the early stage, or when you're hiring somebody new, or somebody's junior and they need to get integrated into the culture, all these pieces, I think it's so important to meet in person. And your company, when you have to accommodate people not being in person relative to like remote workforce, there's like a step change function in terms of the number of processes and things you have to create. Like for example, like if you have somebody and you've worked with them before and you've built trust and they match the culture and they know the operating procedures of the company, then they're going to integrate totally fine in a remote context. So like, I trust this person. I know that if we have to like finish X by Y, that they're going to be able to do it. But if it's somebody new, you don't know, you're like, this person seems cool. Hopefully it works out. And then they're just remote from day one. It kind of can go anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. If they've had that past experience of remote companies and they're the person who can push forward some of these processes, or they're like always online or something like that, then they'll do fine and they'll actually impress you because they'll put in the work to help create those systems and find the failings of the organizational structure where remote doesn't work. But if they're, somebody who just graduated college, or maybe has never worked in a remote company or didn't really think about those processes, then they might fail. They're probably going to fail. Yeah. And it's going to be a bad time because you're going to be like, well, why does this person they must not be good? And they might not be good, or they might have failed because of the context of the organization. And they really could have used that 1 month of working with you guys and understanding how everybody thinks and building that trust where you're like, okay, I need to help this person, throw them a lifeline. So remote work is like, we kind of all opted into it because of COVID. And you're like, okay, now everybody's a remote company. Mm-hmm. And then everybody's there, how do you do remote? And people had all these ideas, and I don't think anybody really knew. This is why you have like leaders like in every major company being like, hey, we need to get back to office. And I think it's because remote work is really hard, and it necessarily slows your organization down a lot because you're adding processes.
Well, and also, we don't have to have the old model. It doesn't have to be 5 days, 9 to 5 or whatever. Startup, right. Maybe it's 9 to 9, whatever. It can be a couple days a week where we all come together, and then you can work remotely. And a lot of independent workers are responsible and they're going to do their job. But for me, it's two-sided. Like, I'm very mission oriented, and also I want to have a good time with my life. So these projects need to feel good to me. I want to be around people. I want to be around my team. I want that relationship and that connection, and I want the project to be meaningful as well. So there's the twofold part, right? The meaningful project, and to build with people that are values aligned, these kind of things, and to be creative together. So for me, half of the work is being in person with the people. So when we're hiring, I'm selfishly like, hey, you're coming, right? Like, I want you here. Another good thing about the network school was it's in this big hotel. So I wake up in the morning, they're doing fitness classes every day. There's 4 classes a day led by this guy. So you can make whatever time works for you, 7, 8, 9 in the morning, whatever. And then after that, I go shower, and then I go to the lobby because there's tons of co-work spaces all around. There's even one you can take a 10-minute walk to, but I like the lobby. It's had this big high ceiling, and there's just this work environment, and then also people I can bounce ideas off of, get to know people, what they're doing in their different fields of expertise. And then there was no overhead. I hadn't been in a car. I mean, I would leave to go to town, zero commute. You're walking everywhere. So we got a lot done. I feel like we were highly productive there.
Network state sounds amazing because it sets the right schedule, the right environment. It's a forcing function. But like so much in life is like trying to find that right schedule and rhythm for yourself, because if you get into that, then that just lets you be more mentally free. You don't have to worry about as much. You're like, okay, I just kind of have this planned structure to my day, and I'm starting it off on the right foot.
Sure.
I'm starting it off with like exercise, making that, positive dopamine in your body. And then maybe there's like sunlight, and now I'm in a great environment and I didn't have to like sit through a massive commute to get here.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Because it's actually quite draining to be like in these commutes. And then especially if it's like, you're inhaling like some kind of like toxic smog from, this whole idea that like, let's shove everyone into cities. There's a reason why people wanted to be near other people, because that's like, fun and valuable and easier to make money, but there's also drawbacks to like cramming millions of people into a tiny little like space.
So I'm curious to talk more about like Silicon Valley. I left almost 5-6 years ago now. You've been in the trenches, and I'm just curious of like your thoughts on a little bit before you were saying you were disappointed, and so I want to hear more about it. I actually stopped you earlier because I was like, no, let's talk about this.
Oh man. I've constantly had this like love-hate relationship with Silicon Valley, San Francisco. I haven't lived in Silicon Valley proper, just in San Francisco for like the last decade. I think the things that I love are the freedom of expression, the entrepreneurial spirit, and like all the good things come with the bad. It's like a whole package, right? It's like really hard to figure out like where to modify that structure to get like maximize the entrepreneurial spirit without like damaging it from difference in policy.
So right, like to be audacious enough to think you can create something, but then like somehow not having messianic narcissism. Right. I'm changing the world. No, right. I'm changing the world.
Right. Yes, I don't know where that formula is. Like it's a very sensitive system, right? And so if you edit something too much, then it might just kill the entire thing. So you kind of got to take the good with the bad. I think San Francisco has gone through its ups and downs, and I'm speaking to San Francisco specifically here. Silicon Valley, the broader context. There's a lot of like nuance to it, but I think it's on the up and up. I think it's coming back, and not AI is like a core part of that. With the influx of all the capital for these new AI startups, but I think it's on the up and up because it became not great to be there, I think, because of governance reasons during COVID, especially. I was there during COVID, like one of the few people that stuck around, not for any other reason that I was just lazy. I didn't want to like figure out where to go.
So you didn't want to be locked in a box, but
right. I was just like, where am I going to go? It just seems like too much work to move. But I think it's on the up and up because it's that there's a furthering of the entrepreneurial spirit, and if people want to do great things, they want to be around great people, and I still think there's a high density and concentration there. It's the whole network effects thing, right? Once you've got them, they're very hard to unravel. And I think the people that left during COVID were some of the people who were there maybe for not the right reasons, or people who had just achieved what they wanted and wanted to go elsewhere, or people who just didn't love the place enough, which is totally fine. I have no like deep love for San Francisco, but I do. It's it's a love-hate relationship. I don't know.
But no, you didn't tell me the bad part.
The bad part, I think, is.
I think we're talking about crypto and blockchain.
Yeah, well, so in regards to San Francisco, crypto is out of vogue. It's because it seems like San Francisco has this whole like ethical morality thing. And AI seems pure and ethical and right, and it's like an ethical technology in a way. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it. Whereas crypto doesn't meet that bar. There's like a social status associated with the things that you work on. So if you look at it, there's like, oh, you're working on AI, and even B2B SaaS is higher. But if you're working on but if you're working on crypto, oh no, that's like the same as like a vice industry. Like owning a weed shop is like higher status and more morally correct than like in crypto, right?
It's kind of like having a casino or something.
Right. Yeah. And crypto, in some ways, was native to Silicon Valley. Vitalik spent a lot of time there. The Solana team was there, and it came out of there. Sui and Aptos, whatnot, from Silicon Valley, because great things were built there in technology in Silicon Valley. But crypto's the financialization layer of the internet. People try to ascribe all these things to it, but it's the internet liquidity layer. It's the financialization of these primitives that we built back in the day. And I think people should lean into that, to what it is. But a part of financialization is speculation. And because we haven't been able to crack some of the bigger things, or we've gone slower than we expected, who knows what the reason is, speculation's been the dominant use case. Somebody can spin up a monkey coin out of thin air, and now all of a sudden it's worth more than like a revenue generating business on IZ, right? So it's like, what's happening here? So I think it's a fundamentally low status thing to do in Silicon Valley. And it's not only the speculation, I think it's the norms that have formed in the industry, where it's, for some reason, we find it permissible to elevate the scammers, the grifters, the people, committing crimes. We give people second chances. The people that are most known in our industry are like SBF, there's now like in San Francisco people who are like, SBF is great because of his effective altruism association, and it's kind of, when you elevate the people who are the worst in your industry, people look at it on the other side and they're like, kind of like, yeah, maybe there's cool technology, but there's no real product market fit, and the people that they elevate are just generally bad people. So then you become low status, I think, amongst the technologists who want to build things that affect end users and to change the world, right? Now, by the way, there's a huge amount of grift and all these kind of things in AI as well. Any hot technology will absorb capital and bring the worst elements of society into it. And the grifts that you see in AI are like beautiful, right? They're just amazing, right? So
I think the transparency of crypto makes visible some things that were previously, maybe if you don't hang out in finance, you maybe can be a little naive about just how intelligent and disgusting thieves can be. How shameless some people can be to get more money. And but crypto, I think the invention, it did fix something, but it didn't fix other things. And I think if somebody was expecting it to sort of change human nature, or like stop people from lying or committing fraud, like that it certainly didn't do that. And it's funny that you say this sort of like status thing with AI and crypto, because I used to work in AI, and I went into crypto because I had this sort of maybe naive view that it had greater potential to kind of positively change the world. There was this sort of like fix the money, fix the world. I was very much in that camp, and I still am largely, but a little more, I guess, jaded about it now. But AI to me was like, and this was back in 2012, 2013. Is like, okay, this is where are you getting a job in AI? This is like, well, defense, offense, and finance, and so it's kind of like solidifying the existing power structures. And whereas crypto had this sort of like, oh, we're going to turn the world upside down, the system is a living thing and has a way of absorbing its critics quite effectively, so now Bitcoin is, embedded in the government, but like we didn't exactly throw the central bankers out on the street. So
the way I kind of view it is like crypto is freedom maximizing technology. AI is knowledge maximizing technology, at least in their current instantiations. And that's because the permissionless nature of crypto lets anybody deploy capital to the internet, right? Or an idea or a meme or whatnot. And it's really about breaking boundaries or, boundless, liquidity and things like that. So it really is freedom, to your point, freedom maximizing, because I'm not now held to the whims of a state in terms of their capital controls. And, like I can pay with, a stable coin in a more stable currency than my own local one. And then I can send that instead of like going through some crazy remittance maze to family members in some other country, right? So I do view it as like freedom maximizing, because if you can own the means of how you generate capital and how you save and preserve your capital, and maybe how you make it as well, then that lets you be far more free and flexible, outside of the bounds of the specific state that you're in, which goes into like, Balaji's thinking around network state, in terms of people who are citizens of the internet. relative to like one geographic region. Though I do think it's important to have an affinity to your geographic region, which is why, being in the US and being in San Francisco is like an ideological choice and, decision that you make, and you're locked there and you want to be a good citizen and very cognizant of the local environment versus
you got
like
skin in the game.
You got skin in the game versus like I live like in some cloudy place. You want to do both. You don't want to just you want to be very aware of the place that you're actually like physically rooted, right?
Right.
Now you might belong to some tribe in the cloud, and that's great, but you definitely want to know like what the hell is happening in this place, like how are taxes going, like
Sure.
what kind of decisions are these people making? Are my neighbors crazy, right? Like
you attend to the body and the physical world,
right.
The land. You don't want to just live in your head and not, But I think this permissionless nature of crypto is its superpower, and that's also probably why it's lower status. I mean, on the one hand, you can kind of play the like socialist, virtuous kind of game and say, well, Bitcoin is the first truly public utility that we've ever had. Things get called public. They call it public health or public, financing or whatever. But like Bitcoin literally doesn't care what species you are. Like if anybody who has an internet connection can use Bitcoin. And, and you can't really say that about any other utility on planet Earth. And so, but of course that sort of acts as a diffusion thing because status is really about exclusivity. And so I think that AI is currently more high status because it currently requires tremendous amounts of compute resources to really do the modern forms of it. And I think as the technology commodifies, we're going to see it become more low status because people are like common people are going to do things with AI that like, the elites of industry would never consider doing. And I think the analogy to look historically with I think of the Catholic Church and the printing press. To me, that was like, the Catholic Church had a monopoly on books, basically, like authority, authorship. You had to be a member of this elite class of monks and to become priests to learn Latin, this magical language, so that you could read the book, that was handcrafted. And it was, of course, these books were beautiful and there's a lot of magic and all of that. But then also, they get to just sort of decide what the book says, and then the printing press gets invented, and suddenly they don't have this monopoly. And even with all their political power, they couldn't uninvent this printing press, and so people started printing books themselves. And of course, it led to this explosion of like low quality books. Like the average quality of the book just went straight down, and it also created a basis for people to form nation states because now like you could share a language with people who were so far away that you could never meet them in person. So like the Italian language couldn't exist without books, and the English language couldn't exist. So this idea of a nation state in some ways is kind of, it's highly dependent on language and our ability to kind of coordinate around shared symbols.
Wait, do you guys think we've invented a new language because of, social networks, and maybe now with AI? Have we invented new forms of conversation? I mean, I guess we have with like slang, but like
people used to use the word net speak. It was like LOL was like net speak, and
do people actually say like lol or LOL? Yeah, they do actually.
They do.
Yeah. People are like lol, BRB, yeah.
Wait, in person?
In person, yeah. I've heard it, yeah. But have we like made like our own like new language?
I absolutely think that the internet is going to create more convergence of. I mean, it already is convergence of languages. It's sort of like the Tower of Babel. Like there's so much incentive to share symbols. That's part of why Silicon Valley makes so much money is it facilitates communication. First we taught the machines how to communicate, then we gave everyone a machine, and they're like, okay, now let's send images to each other, pictures of cats. Haha, I like cats. Cool too. What about this political philosophy? And so, it's a powerful tool for propaganda and culture, affecting culture.
But do we keep does English keep dominating as that convergent language, or do we come up with something new?
It's interesting because I think about money and English, and like everywhere you go all over the world, there's that conversion table. If you want to go change your money, you go to the airport, and it's always the USD at top. And what's the language of money? If you're not a native English speaker, you teach your children English because you want them to have an opportunity with finance. So I wonder, will Bitcoin ever be on the top of that conversion chart? And what is that language? What is the
U.S. dollar is reserve currency for many places. because that's how they settle trade, with the U.S. and all that kind of stuff. And so that's like a very powerful position to be in. Whether the U.S. will continue to, dominate that is left as an exercise for all of us to live over the next, decade or so to figure out. I don't know if, there could be this return to gold. There could be this, Bitcoin thing, which is just gold that you can teleport with you anywhere. Will we settle in that? Maybe. It seems like it's too volatile.
Sure.
And so I'm not sure if it meets the criteria for that, but it's not owned by any one sovereign. So there is this idea that maybe we could. But like English and dollar dominate right now as the internet native language and currency, which is kind of cool.
It is.
But like we talked about this before, crypto is the financialization layer of the internet. So Bitcoin would be the internet's native form of capital. Maybe ETH, maybe Sol, who knows? But like, it seems like something there would be the means through which the future conducts trade, or maybe it's all the tokens, right? Maybe it's everything.
I mean, nature is quite. She lets parasites and symbiotes both exist. So there's no one right way to do these things, but.
Should we jump into parasites? I mean, I feel like we're.
You want to talk about some parasites?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we were on the thread earlier, but maybe we just like exhausted everything in terms of like.
I mean, like everybody has parasites.
Well, okay, so let's
Let's start with that.
Here's how I think about parasites, right? So there's like really it's like game theory. There's like positive sum games, which are like that's like entrepreneurship where you offer a service and people voluntarily take your service and offer you something in return, and it's among the people who practice that viewed as a very ethical way to interact with the world, like win-win. Hey, let's work together, and and then on the other hand, there's zero sum games or even negative sum games where sort of in order for you to win, somebody else has to lose, right? And so, like for example, day trading is mostly like you're in a gladiator ring with other rich people, and you're trying to take other rich people's money, and it's and
so
then,
good gladiator ring with rich people,
and some of them are robots, but so. When you think about parasites are life forms that have adopted a life strategy that's essentially zero sum. They're like they take and they don't give anything back. But I think what distinguishes there's other zero sum games. There's like you might think of like competitors, which could be like a different species or the same species. You also think of predators, which are also in these zero sum games. The difference between these three is generally the size. Like a parasite is generally smaller than you, and so like it has to have this strategy of cloaking itself from the host so that the host doesn't kill it, because the host could easily kill it. And then predator, on the other hand, also wants to use camouflage, but for different reasons, because it wants to sneak up on you and eat you. And so I don't know. So when I think of parasites, I think of it in this broad category of like something that's like, in a zero sum game with me, but actually I could just get rid of it if I knew it was there. And I think, so we were talking about worms earlier, and I think that's, these guys, like, I mean, it's just crazy if you try to put yourself in the mindset of a worm. Like, the worm does, if you have a worm in your body.
The mindset of a worm. like right now, we're trying to humanize and embody a worm.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you, like, the worm doesn't know it's in your body. Like, it was just born, like a little egg got into your foot and then crawled its way somehow into your digestive system. And now you're like.
This would be a great visual.
Yeah.
Right.
And just like, imagine this worm. He's just born and this is what he lives in your intestines, and he's like, wow, what a great environment. There's food here for me, and like, so he just eats some of the food. It's your food, but he doesn't know that. Like, they don't respect property rights. They don't even know you exist. You're literally just the environment. So, and then later it gets older and it starts to realize like, hey, if I execute certain actions, I get more food, so, and I think this is where you get these like, quite bizarre and fascinating life forms like Toxoplasmosis gondii, where like it actually modifies the behavior of its host to get it to do things that's beneficial for the parasite. But like,
you guys know about toxoplasmosis?
It's a whole thing. I know it's a whole thing.
You
I
know
don't
about
really...
cat people?
Yeah.
This is highly controversial here.
Right. Yeah,
now we're about to go there.
Yeah, the cat people aren't going to like this. Listen, I love cats. I love all of God's creatures. I don't think you should necessarily invite them all in your house. So cats have this little bacteria that lives in, I think it's a bacteria, who lives inside them, and called toxoplasmosis. And if it gets into a mammal brain, such as a rat, then it will cause the rat to, normally rats are afraid of cat urine because cats eat rats, but rats with toxoplasmosis will be attracted to it. Because that's the next stage of its life cycle. This bacteria, it wants to go live in the cat digestive system, and so it's got this whole like sort of weird loop going on between multiple species, and it's like, how did that sort of thing get started? I mean, like, who knows?
So toxoplasmosis is a mechanism through which feline animals or through which cats can basically psyop rats into becoming
right. And so then when you look at cat people, they're a little different than dog people. They're pretty evangelical about their cats. And if you look at cats, they're not exactly the most like affectionate creature. They have affection, but it's when they want it. It's not like a dog that kind of like you can, So
the dog becomes your slave, and it's like very, but the cat is sort of like I don't feel like it. It's like I literally feed you. You would starve to death without me. What do you mean you don't feel like it? I want a fluffy pet friend, and and you're not giving out. So
what percent of mental ailments and current physical ailments are generated from, do you think, these like parasites and worms? If everybody has these things, how do we tease apart like it's our physical environment, or it's like spending too much time on your phone, or it's like parasite or worms? Like,
I'm who sure, is like, the real me? Like,
right,
who am I?
Right.
This is a deep question.
Yeah, because they say like the bacteria in your stomach have like completely different DNA from you. And so they have like their own like whole ecosystem, their life cycles. They're like, they have their neighbors. Some of them are probably super racist against the other bacteria. They're like, we don't hang out with Candida. They're like, they're always like hanging out with heavy metals, and we don't like that music. So, but they have no idea that they're in your belly, and yet like, so like, who are you? Like you would probably die without all this bacteria.
Well, it's like if you remove everything, right? This is like, the sadhus in India will go at the, pinnacle of their training into the Himalayas, into the darkness, and fast. They won't have food. They'll go into darkness and try to find their own true nature, right? So, and a part of that is probably getting rid of the parasites and then figuring out who you really are. The reason we were talking about parasites earlier is that Chris and I both recently, in the past 6 months, did water fast. I did 7 days. I think you did like 10 days.
Yeah.
And I definitely had this feeling at the end of it of feeling like myself, which was kind of an interesting concept, right? Because I am myself, right?
Like more than usual, though.
Yeah, I felt this calm, inner peace, stillness. Now, I did just spend a week in
tell
nature.
me what that's like. That sounds great.
Well, right, like, it wasn't a controlled experiment because I was in nature, right? I was deep in nature. There was no noise pollution. There was no light pollution at night. I didn't have my phone on for 7 days. I was completely off of the screen. So there was a lot of other things happening, not just the water fast, right? So I can't tell you which one thing did it, but the combination of them created a genuine sense of inner peace and silliness, lightness. When I came back and went out, and I thought I was going to be very feeling introverted, but no, I went to this like big social event, and I just felt this lightness. And I had lived in this city for 5 years, but it felt like it was my first day in the city. I was rediscovering the magic and beauty of why I moved there and why I loved it, and it just gave me a fresh perspective. So something about removing everything, and then you kind of find out who you are. But I did, like I shared with you, visually get to see one of these parasites because of the kind of colonic I was doing during the water fast, gave me the opportunity to actually see it. And there's something about seeing it that changed something, that mind body visual connection of it. And I was like, that thing was in me, and it was large, and it had obviously been there for a long time. It wasn't just like I picked this up in a burger or something. Like, this was there for a while. And like, how is that affecting who I am and how I think? I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's interesting how like little things affect big things. So David Deutsch has like this thing where for most of human history, big things affected small things, right? Like asteroids, planets, and all that stuff. They formed through big explosions. And just things bumping into each other. But once life formed, and you could essentially instantiate genetic knowledge, right? So there's two kinds of knowledge according to Deutsch. It's like there's biological knowledge and explanatory knowledge, the human kind of knowledge. But biological knowledge is very much like human knowledge. It also has like an evolutionary process, right? Human knowledge is like evolutionary as well. We guess things and we criticize things, and that's how we make progress and improvements. And so once we could like encode knowledge into these bacteria, whatever the first life forms were, they could have huge effects, right? They changed the climate of the Earth. And now, like, if alien cartographers are looking down on Earth, they'll be like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is not usual, right? Like, this is like unusual activity here. So yeah, once you could like, encode knowledge into things, and knowledge doesn't need to have a subject. It doesn't need to have a knowing subject. Like, it doesn't need to exist in human brains. It could be in books. It could be in animals, right? But humans have this agency essentially, so they can solve problems that they want to solve rather than just like be mindless bacteria going on doing stuff that they were coded to do. So we don't have that limit with us.
Well, I think there's something really interesting about, you're talking about knowledge, or I'm going to swap out the word information. There's this word, you're talking about physics, entropy, which occurs both in information theory and in thermodynamics. And they mean like, it's the same formula and it has a kind of analogous meaning, but it's quite abstract. But so there's something about like, one of the first, when you learn about cryptography, one of the first things they teach is what's called the one-time pad. And it's maybe the simplest form of cryptography, but also in some sense the most perfect. And the idea is that, you and I have a pre-shared key, which is just a random series of bytes. And then whenever I want to send you a message, I just XOR it, meaning sort of basically, how do I say this? Basically add it to the key and then send you that sum. And the reason this is perfect is because any plain text, any sort of unencrypted message could be represented by any ciphertext, any encrypted message. So there's a kind of like maximal anonymity set there where like basically if we have this, I send you this ciphertext, and then let's say somebody's listening, some kind of eavesdropper. Well, I could leak a fake key to them that then decrypts our message to say something completely different. In fact, I can make it say whatever I want. And so, so that's the sense in which it's like kind of the most perfect. But then it leads to these kind of interesting philosophical questions of where is the information? Because if any message could be derived from this glyph, this ciphertext, then the information is not entirely in there. It's in some kind of relationship between, say, the key and the ciphertext, or the observer in the ciphertext. I know David Deutsch isn't into the observer thing, but I think I don't want to write the observer out of the equation because I am the observer. I made this universe. At least for me, and so. So what is it? Think about entropy in life forms. Like you have, it's sort of like I think it gets pejoratively introduced as chaos or disorder, but I think that's a misunderstanding because if you go to these after entropy kind of gets maximized, it's in a very symmetric situation, like the uniform distribution. Or imagine like you're in the bathtub and you slosh around in the bathtub, right? And then it's like and then you just sit still, right? And what does it do? Entropy takes over and it makes it uniform. It makes it symmetric. Every part becomes more and more like every other part through the process of diffusion. And so in some sense, entropy is moving us towards this kind of like unity. But so death unifies us all, right? That's the kind of maximal point of entropy for your organism is death. And so to keep living, we have to export entropy, right? But what does it look like when a mind is doing that, right? If entropy is in the information, so we sort of like say like randomness, how much entropy is in your randomness, right? If it's not that random, then it's sort of dangerous because somebody could guess it, right? So
would you say creating life is reversing entropy?
I think so, yeah, in the sense that locally, yes, you're taking energy from the sun and from right. From nutrients and things like that. So and different organisms have different levels of skill with what kinds of, like, for example, like mushrooms or fungus can eat things that almost nobody else can eat, right? They can eat a dead stump, or they can figure out how to digest like bones. And
so we need to have more babies.
I mean, exactly. So yeah,
right. Just natural, logical conclusion 100%. Of that, right?
Well, but make sure you can take care of your babies. If you have too many, then now you've got this. Now you got to pick. Now you're playing natural selection.
Choose wisely. Right.
Yeah, choose wisely. Who are you going to make babies with?
Right.
Are you prepared?
Yeah.
Exactly.
That leads to the whole RK selection theory. What did you want to say, actually?
No, just real quick on the pronatalism stuff. Like, people often talk about overpopulation being a problem, but I think more people the more people we have, the easier it is to solve those kinds of problems. I don't even think overpopulation is a problem right now. Like Australia, we could literally have all the humans living on parts that are uninhabited right now in Australia, right? All 8 billion people. And obviously, there's the whole universe, so a lot of places to explore. And the more people there are, the more solutions to the problems that people create, right? But problems are inevitable, but they're also solvable.
And also they're like non-linear. Like
I don't know about that.
You think problems are not inevitable?
No. I'm curious about more people being a good solution, because I just feel like it gets watered down.
I agree with this.
I feel like there's so many people who are not.
Because technological solutions are non-linear. And so you maximize your population, you increase the number of nonlinear individuals who can, create these solutions. Because it's not that, like, if you expand your population by like, 50%, which is a huge number, right? It's not that entirety of that population will all solve the problems.
Okay.
If anything, majority of them will contribute to the problem of overpopulation, but it takes just one person to, build those systems and have that breakthrough that unlocks that next phase of human civilization.
Fair.
That can the rocket man that can take us to space, or the person who knows how to terraform undiscovered planets, or things like that. So it just takes one individual in the set. And so you really want to maximize those special people. And the only way to do that is, so I wonder, do you think overpopulation was like a psyop by people with just like really bad beliefs? It feels like there was like this big theory in the 90s. It's just
a woke religion. They hate, at its core, they hate humanity.
Well, okay, so I think there's another way to think about this, because I've hung around some like old money types before, and kind of got in their heads a little bit, and it's we use this word humanity, and I have an idea that includes all the people with like sapiens DNA, and I think some people don't include everyone in the us category. So when they're promoting this sort of there's too many overpopulation idea, they don't mean of them and their friends. They mean of people that they consider in their out group. So you can almost sort of like, because we're not worried about like if it were all chickens, like if there were like trillions of chickens, taking over the world, or like an invasive species, something like that, like we would be upset, and we'd be like, hey, you guys are like, encroaching on our way of life. And the chickens would be like, no, like we have a right to be here. We need to make more babies. And we'd be like, no, you are our food. Like, so I think that there's, when you say overpopulation, of who exactly?
By the way, I think it's actually helpful to species that we consume, that we actually consume them.
It's helpful for their DNA,
it's
right?
helpful for the propagation of their DNA. There's this whole like side quest right now where folks are like, hey, we should make lab grown meat. And maybe that's like a good thing, a bad thing. I don't know. It's
probably
good to
not.
like, I think it's like kind of creepy, but what people don't talk about is that if we do, and when we crack lab grown meat and we're able to do that, what does that do to the population of cows and chickens?
Puts all the cows out of jobs.
Right, exactly, right? Like, why do we need these species any longer if we can generate the parts that are necessary that we want and need, or even like better versions of it?
I'm pro cow.
And this is and this is exactly why do we need them? That's the key phrase, and that's actually if you listen to the World Economic Forum people, like Klaus Schwab and Yuval Harari. I mean, they say like, why do we need so many humans? Like who's the we? Right? Clearly they're thinking of themselves and their friends.
You first.
And so it's always you first. Like, oh, let's all disarm ourselves. Like let's all put our nukes down and be like, okay, you first.
Right.
Yeah. That's why like Robert and Tom Wilson always says, you should always believe that the world is secretly controlled by you and your friends. There's just like, in terms of, if you want to like hook your feeling of power and agency into the world, just do it directly with your belief. And it clearly works.
But with the internet now, you can.
That's
you
right.
You can run your own like propaganda cult with your friends, and
That's
now
right.
you can just like compete with the World Economic Forum for who has like the better memes and the better cults.
Exactly. So this is why I've wanted to see this game for a while. I'm not a great game developer, but I feel like I grew up on a lot of like military games, and it did, I think, contribute to how I think, like both on the ground shooting, but then also like, the top down style, strategy style. I want a PSYOP video game, like PSYOP.me, and like you teach kids how to craft propaganda. Because the thing is, like, if you...
This game already exists.
What is it?
It's the artist formerly known as Twitter. I stole that one from Naval.
No, it's good. I mean, you can think of all of life as a game if you really want, throw people in the river. But I think, what you train your kids to do, I mean, like you want to train them in martial arts, not necessarily because you want them to go beat the shit out of everyone, but you want them to be able to defend themselves, and if you taught people, like, why don't we teach kids how to lie intentionally? Everyone has the ability to lie, and humans do this constantly to each other. But then you've got this like large portion of the populace that just sort of thinks like a child and thinks that the government would never lie to them. And yes, people lie. Like I don't like, of course they lie, but some lies are like difficult to spot if you've never engaged in that kind of thinking before, so I think it's useful to teach children how to do it, not because you want a bunch of lying children, they're going to lie anyway, so like it's like a martial arts, psychic martial arts, anyway, it's my theory.
There's an evolutionary reason behind lying. It's probably an adaptive strategy to preserve resources or to help,
right? Well, and the thing is, like cryptography is classified as munition, and that's because it's pretty useless unless you're in an adversarial environment where you need to protect your message against being edited by someone else, or you want to conceal a message from an adversary. Like if we're all friends, like there's no point to encryption. Like it's this, just talk openly or just talk privately, but like you don't care. And even it was even it still is subject to export treaties. I mean, that's one of the cool things about crypto and blockchain is that it's basically de facto there are no more export treaties on cryptography. Like you can deploy cryptography globally, and this was the whole like cypherpunk idea that like cryptography is tremendously empowering to the individual.
I know. I'm sad we didn't get to talk about. We talked a little bit about freedom, but we didn't talk about privacy.
The only thing I've learned from this experience is that maybe we need the Chris Smith show. just watch Chris like talk for. He's an infinite rabbit hole, man.
Yeah, bro. He's the guy. We just like keep talking.
The analogies are just insane.
Yeah, I love it.
Always
I'm like,
new.
wow. I just can keep going. Just like boom, topic.
Oh, well, I really enjoyed talking with you guys. This has been great.
Me too.
And thanks
Thanks
for
for doing
organizing
this.
this.
Thanks for organizing it.
Thank you guys.